So, good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome you all to this IDHEAP conference on the European Universities Initiative. You may be familiar with our program of conferences here at IDHEAP, and our program is this specificity, which we try to connect academic research to public policy by inviting people from both worlds. And today's conference is not really an exception, but it is. In a way, it's a bit special because the public policy we are interested in, it's us. It's a university policy. That's not something we usually do, but why not? And more specifically, we're going to talk about international cooperation at the European level in university policy, in tertiary education and research, with a focus on a relatively new important initiative by the European Union, the European Universities Initiative, which has been launched in 2022, if I'm not mistaken. And in order to do this, we rely on two people who have a very good knowledge of the topic, as we usually do. The first one is Alina Felder. Alina is a postdoctoral researcher at the School of Economics and Political Science at the University of St. Gallen. She's been working on European science policy for a while, where she had the opportunity also to study the European Universities Initiative. And Alina is also one of the recipients of the IDHEAP Fellowship for Women Preparing an Academic Career. It's a program we launched about a year ago, and we are hosting Alina as well as another person who benefited from it. And Alina is going to be with us until December, is that correct? Yes. And she's going to talk about her research on the European Universities Initiative. Then we also have a second guest, Professor Francois Bussy. Francois is a geologist, professor for igneous petrology. That's correct, yes? I pronounce it correctly, yes, thank you. But he's not going to talk to us about rocks. Don't think so, at least, because Francois developed an interest for science policy, university policy, and he has been dean of the Faculty of Geosciences. He's been vice rector for research at this university until 2021, and is now advisor to the rector of UNIL for CIVIS, an alliance that is part of this European Universities Initiative, and that UNIL joined in 2022. So I'm going to proceed in the following way. Alina will have the floor first and will present her research on the European Universities Initiative. Then we will have a short time for questions, especially practical, concrete questions of understanding. Then we're going to hear Francois Bussy talking about the experience that UNIL is making with CIVIS, which is one of these alliances. And then we will have a general discussion until 18:30, something like this. And then we will, as usually we will have an aperitif just outside. So I think it's everything insofar as the introduction is concerned, and I'm happy to give the floor to Alina. Alina, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Giuliano. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really happy to hold this talk today and also to receive the scholarship for my research stay here at IDHEAP. And as Giuliano said, I will be here until the end of the year. So in the follow-up of the talk, if you want to discuss something, feel free to approach me. And yeah, I'll be happy to discuss not only the European Universities Initiative, but also this topic, which has accompanied me since my PhD project, which was more on border regions and the role of EU regional policy for university cooperation. But since the data collection for this project was in 2019 and 2020, where the initiative was being developed, I also first accidentally collected data on the European Universities Initiative, and then was more and more interested in this initiative, in this policy instrument. And today I will address 3 C's. I will ask how the initiative continues, changes, and also challenges European cooperation in higher education, throughout the talk, I will touch upon research that is conducted by an emergent body of scholarship on the initiative, but also research that I have conducted both by myself and also with colleagues. And so the plan for today would be to briefly introduce what the initiative is all about, shortly summarize what the research agenda has touched upon, but more importantly, I want to address the question of the 3 C's basically, and elaborate here a bit more strongly on the field in which this initiative has to navigate, because the European Union has limited competences in the field of higher education, but a lot of great aspirations for the initiative. I will also talk about the development of the initiative, and then turn to the workings of alliances. Here I will also maybe skip some parts and leave this to the practitioners who are in the room, and then also to the speaker that follows me. And then I would like to present also how this, the initial cooperation results have already fed back into policy making, because that's one of my research areas, how universities do not only take policy, but how they also shape policy. And towards the end, I would like to open up some unresolved tensions that we have, including this major tension of having very long-term goals for the initiative and with the initiative, but the initiative being organized in a project-based format, and this has been captured by the term projectification. So what is the European Universities Initiative? It is one of the European Commission's flagship initiatives that is funded under the Erasmus Plus program and provides up to 14.4 million euros per alliance for a period of each 4 years. These alliances ought to develop long-term, structural, strategic, and sustainable cooperation between at least 3 higher education institutions from 3 different countries. And these countries can be EU member states, but also third countries that are associated to the Erasmus Plus program, such as Switzerland. And the overarching objectives of the initiative are to improve the competitiveness of European higher education, but then also to promote European values. And you might see already one tension arising here with this European values idea. There have been 5 calls for alliances since the first call in October 2018. And so far we have 64 alliances that are operating and that comprise more than 560 higher education institutions in 35 countries. In the scholarly community, this initiative is receiving quite some attention. There is scholarship who's looking into how the initiative has been developed, including by Martina Vukasovic and myself. And then there's a lot of research on how the initiative is being implemented, how the alliances are formed, and how transnational institutions are built through this. This is research done mostly by organizational scholars. I'm a political scientist myself. And then further also from the organizational side of things, researchers have looked into the profiles of the alliances. And then again, from the policy side of things, there's research on how the initiative is achieving or not achieving its policy goals, which is the balance between excellence on the one hand and inclusiveness on the other hand. And across these strands, there is some commonalities. So first of all, this research is interested in the effects of the higher education sector on Europe, but then it is also interested in the effects of EU policies on European universities, including their different missions, such as research, education, and service to the society. And this is just a side note, but if you're interested in this emergent research agenda and also the scholarly community around this, we are quite active. If you're also conducting research on this, please reach out. And we are currently also preparing an edited volume on the upcoming 5-year anniversary of the initiative. And we are also holding monthly research group meetings which address all kinds of topics on the initiative. So let us now turn to my question and this idea of continuation, change, and challenge. Regarding continuation, and this is just a foreshadowing of what I will touch upon later, it is clear that we have always had transnational cooperation among higher education institutions. The internationalization of higher education is nothing new. The Erasmus Plus program is older than 30 years already. We have the Bologna process operating and so forth. So all these elements have been existing before the European Universities Initiative, and the initiative is heavily relying on these elements, but also drawing on these elements and trying to deepen integration in these fields. Regarding change, you can see here on the left-hand side a map of all the alliances that are operating, and this constitutes, at least this is what I would argue, a change, because this is unprecedented, and I said before that it's already 64 alliances that are operative, and they're spanning across a vast number of higher education institutions in Europe, and they are more and more also assuming actorness, as political scientists would argue, because they are also acting as their institutions, as their alliances as an institution, and then also across these newly built alliances, they are issuing joint statements, for example. And then a further change element I inserted here is changes that these alliances bring for learning and for education. Then regarding challenges, you see here a map of a different alliance that has been operative before the European Universities Initiative, but is more focused on a border region. So this is a challenge. So the existing university alliances, the existing landscape of alliances we had before the initiative, then a lot of different policy ideas, especially the European Commission has with the initiative, they pose a challenge. There's this idea of a European degree label. I will come to that later. And this, of course, poses challenges then for the competence issue, right? Because as I said, higher education is just a supportive area of competence for the European Union. Speaking of competence, I'm here inserting the article of the Treaty of the Functioning of the European Union, which states the competences the EU has in this field. And it becomes clear that the EU should mostly encourage cooperation between member states, and in so doing, the following aims shall be reached. The first aim is the European dimension in education, and as you can see from this formulation, this can already mean a lot, and this is also what constitutes the field. There's a lot of different meanings that can be attached to how cooperation can look like. And this is also at the advantage because, at least for the European Commission, because it then can expand its say, because a lot of these ideas are rather vaguely formulated, so the European Commission has a certain leeway of pushing its own ideas. Then, and this is the most central idea of union action, is the mobility of students, and the very core of the Erasmus program is the mobility of students. But then the treaties also state that educational establishments should cooperate, and that's the very core of the European Universities Initiative, and so forth. We can briefly summarize what the EU is doing with the following three components. We have intergovernmental coordination, we have a community method with joint funding instruments, and we also have organizational cooperation. This is a rather lengthy text, just look at the bold formulations, the things in bold. It is the vision the European Commission has for the European Universities Initiative, for the alliances, and I will now touch upon these different elements and relate them to the competence the EU has in the field. So if we look at the long-term joint strategies that these alliances should have, this connects to the European dimension in education, but also to this idea of promoting educational establishment cooperation, so this idea of inter-university cooperation, but also other educational institutions. This idea of a European inter-university campus, where students can take courses from, let's say, 5 different universities and then end up with a European degree, connects to this mobility idea and also to this idea of exchanges of information and experience. So to bring cooperation across universities forward, and also to connect to decision makers, because university systems are nationally embedded and there's quite some obstacles, and we might hear about this later, that come with the national embeddedness of universities. And then finally, there's also this idea of knowledge creating teams, and this idea has also been filled with meaning, very different meanings, and connected to challenge-based learning. We can also discuss this later. So I would now like to press the rewind button, so to say, and look a bit into the development of the initiative, because it reveals also interesting tensions, and I have data on the contentious issues that were debated back then and how they were addressed over the course of further developing the initiative. So there was quite some movement. There was this environment also of a speed dating that immediately happened after the initiative was launched, and one of the interviewees described this to me really as a speed dating atmosphere, where as soon as this idea of European universities was mentioned by Macron in his Sorbonne speech, universities started to look out for partners, even though the initiative was not even fully operative yet. And so this is data from March 2020, where some practitioners described the development to me as follows: that this has been very fast and unusually fast, and that this is the first time that education has been taken up so strongly by heads of state. This might be because Macron has launched this idea in his Macron speech, in his Sorbonne speech, sorry. And then finally also this perception that, well, this is a nice idea, we can all imagine something, and let's do it. This is such a great idea by Macron, and everyone could attach meaning to it. I said this before, several ingredients of the initiative: the idea of a European university, the role of excellence, also the role of higher education for European integration is not new. And so the European Commission, who was received the mandate after the Gothenburg summit of European heads of state, could actually rely on everything that has been there, the Bologna process, I said it before, and also the quite successful Erasmus Plus program. And so more concretely, the initiative was co-created. That's the term the European Commission uses. We can discuss what this term implies, how equal it really was, a co-creation process, or if there were actually some hierarchies. There was an ad hoc expert group involved, which is composed, or was composed, of member state representatives and also stakeholder groups. And here all the existing higher education institution networks and associations were part of. So what were the strategies of the interest groups? A lot of outsider strategies, such as events, position papers, press releases, and this is where it gets interesting, and this connects to the two co-creation groups. There were especially national encompassing interest groups and also European level interest groups adopted insider strategies, and they engaged in a direct contact with EU policymakers. And one interview at the European Commission described it as two communication channels. One is more formalized and the other one is really informal, and were those university alliances that had been operative before and that had been active also as interest groups in Brussels had a clear advantage, and were also asked by the European Commission to share the experience with their cooperation and to help developing this initiative so quickly. speaking of what interest groups bring to the table, Martina and I have analyzed this from a resource exchange perspective, and we see two central resources that were exchanged during the development. First of all, the legitimacy. So the legitimacy of the initiative, as I said, it's a rather sensitive policy field, was primarily ensured through involving member state representatives through the ad hoc expert group. And then the other resource that was exchanged is domain-specific knowledge, and this was guaranteed through including a wide range of European stakeholder organizations. And again, and this is a further interview at the DG for Education at the European Commission said that these are main counterparts for them because they collect feedback from the universities members, so stakeholders at universities, including academic and administrative staff, but also have knowledge from their member universities. And the contentious issues, I just would like to highlight three that were then also taken on board later on. This was the type of eligible higher education institutions. This connects to this idea of the initiative, first of all, wanting to foster excellence, but over time of developing it, it was clear that this is not possible, that this should be as inclusive as possible, and so the type of institutions that would count as higher education institutions was, the list was getting longer and longer. Then the focus on education was also heavily criticized, and because a lot of these university alliances that have been existing before would actually cooperate in the field of research. And the European Universities Initiative is funded by Erasmus, so you cannot use the Erasmus funding for research cooperation. You would need to use it for educational cooperation, meaning for the development of a joint program, for example. So there have been 2 rounds of Horizon top-up funding already, and overall 39 alliances received this funding, and it's unclear so far if this will be continued under the Horizon Europe program. This was under Horizon 2020. But yeah, this has also been taken on board, this criticism. And then of course, this problem that non-program partners would be excluded first. And this was also the case for Switzerland, where Swiss universities from 2022 onwards could then participate and become partners in these alliances. But we will hear more about this later. I don't want to speak too much about the workings of alliances, mostly about the cooperation aspect, not so much about the governance aspect, because I think we will hear more about this later. But overall, I think it is important to keep in mind that alliances among higher education institutions serve and establish different kinds of relationships, right? They establish relationships between higher education institutions, but also between higher education institutions and the outside. And this could be, for example, policymakers. And this is then how we can explain how certain governance structures are emerging and how cooperation looks like. And I don't think I will touch upon the governance. We can discuss this later. I think there will be more on the CIVIS governance. But I would just touch upon the cooperation aspect now. And what we find also in research more generally on the transnational cooperation among universities is that there would always be tensions between top-down pressures and also bottom-up initiatives, and then also between cooperation on the one hand, because together you are stronger, but then also competition, because higher education, and especially the field of research, is a highly competitive field. And in my PhD, I developed this theoretical framework. Actually, it was a lot more complex, so I tried to tone it down a bit. But the idea is really to think about different mechanisms universities are subject to, and mechanisms they also use for cooperation, objectives, and also for their results. And I will substantiate this with empirics now, because I think just presenting this would be too dry. and I'm doing so by using data that builds part of a forthcoming book chapter where I'm more closely looking into the role of climate change for university alliances. And until the fourth call, because this is a chapter that I have already written before the latest call results were issued. So by then, 27 out of the then 50 alliances address climate change. And the way this usually happens is through so-called flagship areas or focus areas. And in the chapter I'm asking, so why do these focus areas emerge? And also, how are these issues then addressed, issues of climate change, sustainability addressed in the daily workings of an alliance? The data uses documents by all these 27, but then I also conducted interviews with certain of these alliances last fall. This is the mechanisms again, I'm sorry. But yeah, let's look into the structural mechanism or the idea behind. So the idea here is, and this is the top-down part of the argument, that you have certain opportunity structures that constrain cooperation, but they can also enable cooperation. And then for the case of climate change and sustainability as a topic for alliance cooperation, we can expect that alliances focus on the issue of climate change because of certain funding instruments, because funding instruments would enable cooperation in this field, or because there are certain societal expectations. When it comes to why alliances actually use this, why universities use opportunity structures, it's more this relational idea, so the relationship in which the university finds itself vis-a-vis policy ideas and also the wider society, and the role of the motivation of the institution. And here this idea is that you use opportunity structures to better position yourself as an institution or to exert influence. And the corresponding expectation then would be that university alliances cooperate on this issue of climate change to strengthen their profiles or to exert influence in this field, because maybe they have very applied research in this field and they want to influence policymaking for climate change mitigation, for example. When we look into this empirically, we see that there are indeed quite some exogenous drivers. So this structural mechanism, there is funding requirements that would actually enable cooperation in the field of climate change. And you see on the top, this quote from the call for university alliances under the European Universities Initiative that explicitly mentions that the alliances should address the digital and green transition. And but then I also found a lot of evidence for political and societal demands when talking to representatives from different alliances, and when they were designing their alliance cooperation, they were thinking about the role of their institution, but also of the alliance for the society. And that's where this political and societal demand component comes in. But then there's also endogenous drivers, and a lot of this is coming from what universities have been working on before and whom they have been cooperating with before. So it's both the complementarities between the individual institutions' foci of research, but also education, and it's also the pre-existing cooperation that we might have. And there's quite some research actually showing that the first waves of the alliances show a strong correlation to previous alliances universities had before, because it would always be easy to reach out to partners you already know and say, okay, let's apply for this great new funding. And so this is where the endogenous drivers come from. And then you see this positioning idea that, okay, through combining all our offers in this field of climate change education, students get a broader spectrum of this field, right? So by joining forces, we can offer students more education in this field, but also we can collaborate in the field of research. But then again, bear in mind that this is an education instrument and not, strictly speaking, a research instrument, but still all the alliances that are operating also cooperate in the field of research, because it's also hard to disentangle. And then in the end, it's a mix of both, right? Which is nicely illustrated by this quote from an interview with an alliance representative. So it's both the question of what are the strengths of the alliance in this area, and then what would be expected when we submit this to the European Commission to get funded, so what would reviewers say, and then also what does the target group, so what do students actually want? And so it's a mix of both. It comes together. Okay, I'm now reaching this part where I would like to touch upon the feedback of alliances for policymaking. So we're back in the policymaking arena. And I think this is interesting to look at, not only because I'm a political scientist, but also because there's quite some policy activity at the European level since the launch of the initiative. And the central piece of this activity is the European Strategy for Universities, which was issued by the European Commission in April 2022, and where there's a lot of blah blah, as you can see partly here. So emphasizing that the society of today needs strong contribution by universities, that any challenge you can think of to tackle it, we need strong universities. But still, this has had quite some influence already, and there are tangible instruments connected to this. While we have this great rhetoric and this idea that, well, basically universities are problem solvers across the board and they should tackle any problem you can think of, there's also flagship initiatives of this strategy, and the European Universities Initiative is one of the flagship areas. And then there's also the European Degree Label, I mentioned this before, the European Student Card Initiative, and this idea of a European legal status for alliances. Okay, now we're a bit back to the theoretical point of things, and to this role of projectification and research that has looked into the project world of EU funding, and where we find this argument that the European Commission uses project funding as a policy tool. But interestingly enough, so we have this argument, but we don't really have proof yet, because scholars only look at the adaptation of the beneficiaries. So they look into how do administrative structures change when implementing projects, how does the project world work at those that benefit from the funding, but we rarely see research looking at the feedback of all this, even though this is built into the project-based implementation of EU funding, right? Because you would always have reporting happening, you would have these groups that I mentioned before, the European Commission heavily relying on former beneficiaries to gather ideas for new initiatives they have, which is why I argue that projectified EU policies have policy consequences, and that we can show that beneficiaries influence policy content and formulation. And for this argument, I have again developed 3 feedback paths, and I don't want to go through them theoretically, but rather show you how I think they apply to the European Universities Initiative. Evidently, this is preliminary evidence because the initiative is rather young, it's, almost 5 years old, but still, I think there's some things we can show. So the first feedback idea is that EU policy creates a target group of beneficiaries who then reuse EU policy instruments, right? Once you have a target group constructed with a policy instrument, beneficiaries make use of it. They think, okay, this is useful, why not reuse it? And you can actually see this reuse pattern happening in the European Universities Initiative, because from the third and fourth call onward, so from 2021 onward, we see a differentiation of funding lines. And so university alliances that have been established already in the first two calls could apply to intensify their institutional cooperation. That's the first topic. But then the call still asked for new alliances to be established. This was the second topic. And there was an extra benefit. If you apply for topic one as an existing alliance, you would get extra money. So there was a clear financial incentive given by the European Commission to make this network of alliances even broader by differentiating the funding lines and by maintaining this target group of beneficiaries. The second feedback path is more based on this idea of gaining knowledge about how things work, right? And this idea that the project-based cooperation becomes viable for those who use it, and you would then advocate for it. You say, okay, this is actually useful, we like project funding, we want to use it in the future, and we then would approach decision makers to maintain this as an instrument. And in the case of the European Universities Initiative, we had first an informal alliance network. It's called 4U, where 41 alliances actually exchanged on a regular basis, and were also invited on a regular basis by the European Commission to report back how they experience the initiative, how the implementation of the funding works. And as of very recently, this network of networks, if you want to say so, it's a meta network now, has been formalized, and the European Commission equipped it with extra funding. So you do not only have these networks that receive funding through the European Universities Initiative, but you now also have the 4EU for All project. And the European Commission labels this as a community of practice, and it's still not entirely clear what is meant by that. So far we know that it's meant for best practice exchange, and that the European Commission wants to extrapolate or gain the most of experience across the alliances to then, that would be my hunch, influence policy initiatives that are connected. And that's actually the third path, where you would shape opportunity structures that are not existent yet, right? So this is this idea of actorness, and you can clearly see, I'm also not too deeply into international relations research where this idea of actorness is coming from, but you can see that this is really a common identity that is being established. You have an acronym, and you can see that all these alliances, not only each individual alliance has their own corporate identity, so to say, but now all the alliances act as one, basically. And here we have different things, and most importantly, the blueprint for European degree that is currently being developed. Not the blueprint is already there, but this idea of establishing a European degree, which has now more turned into a degree label and not a proper degree, because as you can imagine, member states are not too fond of giving away their competence for awarding actual degrees, and universities as well. We can also discuss this later. And then there's also this idea of a European legal status for alliances, because for now the alliances have to find different ways where to legally locate the alliances. Okay, we have now reached the end. I'm sorry.
You're fine.
I'm fine. Okay. I wanted to stop the time, but I forgot. Too enthusiastic. All right. As an outlook, I want to look into this projectification idea again and connect it to what I said in the very beginning, this great aspirations idea that this should transform European higher education. And I really like this quote from one of the interviews at the DG for Education at the European Commission. stating that, well, it shouldn't be an alliance for the sake of an alliance. But if you fund alliances in a project-based format, you might actually run exactly this risk, right? Nevertheless, if we look into the basic idea behind projectification, it describes that you increasingly rely on temporary organizations, which are typically projects, in order to enhance action and strategic effort. So from a projectification aspect of things, which is very neutral and also, not too critical actually, you would say, okay, this is, we can reconcile having a long-term strategy and having shorter-term implementation units of this. And we also find reference to this idea in EU scholarship. And projects have been labeled as investment tools and also delivering vehicles. But I would still argue that there's quite a tension here, and that these long-term strategic goals you might have might actually not be reached if you cannot guarantee funding over a longer period of time. And in fact, and I showed this in my forthcoming book for the case of border region networks, that a lot of the results from alliance cooperation can only be seen after 10 years or so. And that especially these interpersonal relationships take time, and that you cannot build something new from scratch, especially if the ties have not been as strong before and if the distance is so far, right? So, I mean, in border regions, you would still have the advantage of people being actually able to see each other more frequently, but with these European university alliances, you have this criterion of transnational reach, and they have to be from 3 different member states at least, so you really have a broader geographical span. Yeah, and that's actually also what this 4EU network, when it was not the 4EU for all project yet, was arguing. So they have a statement where they call on the member states to think about holistic and sustainable long-term funding, and essentially what I just said, right, that European universities, to actually achieve what it promises, so this initiative, we need to go beyond short-term approach. And so ideas are, for example, to have more combined resources, so to make use of all the different funding instruments we have. I know from my PhD research that this is really difficult, and that there's also quite some reluctance by the different DGs we have in the European Commission, because the regional policy people, they want to do their regional policy, then you have the higher education portfolio, so there's quite a turf battle here. And so yeah, this might, but that's an idea, so let's keep it at that for now. And I also brought some other unresolved tensions that we have. I mentioned the cooperation versus competition issue before, also this problem that the initiative wants to foster excellence, but the Erasmus program has to ensure inclusiveness. We also have this very optimistic view of all things European, but if we look into different member states, we also see a lot of setbacks for European values and also threats to academic freedom. And then also alliance workings, right? We see a lot of ambition by EU policymakers, but then those who have to implement the actual alliance are facing quite some issues, and very often a university's membership in an alliance is not really known by a lot of members of a university, for example. Yeah, and then there's also all sorts of other tensions when it comes to the implications of the alliance. Well, that we should maybe not stretch the tasks of higher education that far. I mean, I inserted the European strategy for universities, mentioning higher education as a tool solving any problem. And then, of course, we would always stay with the tension between having a supportive EU competence and system-level reforms that would be required, actually, to implement, for example, the European degree. I think this is all the tensions I can think of, but there's quite some more, I can imagine, and I would like to thank you a lot for your attention.
Wow, this was a fantastic presentation, Alina, very rich, a lot of information, very interesting, quite dense as well. And I'm very curious to see how all this translate into the local level of the University of Lausanne. But before giving the floor to Professor Bussy, who will tell us about this, I would like just to have a short moment of discussion. If there is something you didn't understand, for example, if there is some aspect you would like some more information to get a clear view of what this European Universities Initiative is like at the European level, and then we will focus on us afterwards. So we can take like 5 minutes for factual or understanding questions. So I was expecting this and I prepared one. As we all know, the university landscape is quite stratified. There are rankings of universities. There is prestige attached to universities in different ways. And I was wondering, who are the universities that are participating in these alliances, the most enthusiastic ones, for example? Are there some universities who are driving it? Are the big, old established universities snubbing this initiative or not at all? They're also enthusiastic about it. Maybe you can say something about who are the universities.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So there's also quite some research on that already. For example, by Agatha Lambrechts, and she and colleagues analyzed the first 2 rounds and how representative the alliances are of the wider higher education institution landscape. And they find that over time, the initiative gets more inclusive, so that the first call, we clearly can see that prestige matters a lot. So you would have the research intensive universities being really strong in the first call, where then 17 alliances were selected, and where also certain country patterns are strong. So Germany was overrepresented, for example, in this first call. But then over time, and they actually are currently extending their data set to now it's 5 calls, and but that's also a matter of time, right? That over time you manage to become more inclusive.
But it started
because
from the top.
It started from the top, definitely. Yeah. And also in the development of the initiative, there was quite some battle also between those countries or member states that have an excellence initiative. So again, Germany was really vocal about keeping this at a limited number of alliances. So they were really not happy about this expansion. That it is now 64 alliances was clearly not what certain member states would have wanted, because they wanted to keep it as an excellence initiative and mirror what they have. So yeah, and there's also more qualitative research showing, so Rachel Brooks and Lee Ransomer, they show that also in forming these alliances, and they interviewed people who have been involved in alliance formation, that they couldn't get a hold of partners because they already promised to cooperate with partners they had before. And these, transnational alliances among universities was already happening before, and there were already pre-existing alliances among those that are more similar to each other, right? So you would rather cooperate with another research-intensive university and another university that is also equally prestigious as your university. So it's clearly, so yeah, there's research showing that it might actually further stratify European higher education. Yeah.
Interesting. Any other question of understanding? Yes.
Yeah, it's good. Stupid question you're not supposed to answer. But do you think at the policy level, the idea is that at some point each university will be part of European alliances, So it means like a restructuring of the higher education environment, or is it more a question of only the strong will survive, and you have 64 right now, and maybe at some point you will have less, but very strong universities, which goes towards the idea of excellence that was mentioned.
Speaking from a, well, power-seeking rationale of the European Commission, I would say that the scenario where each university we have in Europe is part of an alliance is likely, but it's not a uniform actor, so there's also voices inside the European Commission who would then say, okay, we maybe want to keep the excellence bit because we also are dependent on applicants, right? So if you take out this excellence rationale of the initiative, you might lose interest, and then if anyone can get in, then, well, what's the point of making a competition about it? So I think there is still this idea of keeping it a competition, but then also the Commission was really generous, and I showed this example of the two funding lines, where if you extend your network, you can get more funding. I'm not so sure. So I think it might be both, so, and it might not be decided, but ideally you would have only European universities in the future that award European degrees, and there won't be national degrees, but that's so far away.
Another future.
Yeah, totally.
Other questions? So if that's not the case, I suggest that we move to the second part of the conference. Thanks a lot, Alina. And I would like to invite Francois Bussy. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. First, I would like to thank Giuliano for letting me share with you the daily life of a university within an alliance. And there's a lot to say, and I don't have much time, but still. So, as you guessed now, UNIL is part of a European alliance which name is CIVIS. CIVIS is a group of 11 universities, including UNIL, from all parts of Europe, and also 6 African associate members. So what's the specificity of this alliance is actually the civic engagement towards society and stakeholders from the society. And a few numbers here. CIVIS was among the first 17 alliances Alina mentioned, launched in 2019, and UNIL joined in October 2022. And I draw your attention about the timeline between the time Movesia launched the call inviting Swiss universities to apply for money to join in an alliance, and the time UNIL was in CIVIS. It's 9 months. It's extremely short. In fact, my feeling is that the rectorate of UNIL just seized this opportunity, and without any, I would say, psychological preparation of the UNIL community, and this had and still has a strong impact on the development of CIVIS within our institution. I will come back to that in a while. So it was really in a rush. And we were sponsored by University Libre de Bruxelles, which is one of our privileged partners. And they said, oh, you guys at UNIL, we know you very well. Your DNA is very similar to the DNA of CIVIS, to which we belong, and you should join. And that's what we did. And indeed, we have a good alignment between the CIVIS missions and the UNIL plan d'intention of the current rectorate. It fits, match perfectly. So after a while, we created last October, a year ago, a CIVIS team, a local CIVIS team, which is called Cellule CIVIS. And we are 10 persons in this group, but it's 6.6 equivalent full-time to administrate CIVIS at the local level. And this is mostly on soft money, which means that by the end of 2026, we have no idea what will be available for the next step. As Alina mentioned, that's really a weak point of these alliances. We hope for the best, of course. And for a month now, CIVIS is a legal entity. It wasn't before, under the Belgian law. It's an association internationale sans but lucratif, like other alliances, so that we have a kind of a status now, official status, which is important for the next steps, I think. And last but not least, in this alliance, each university presides the islands. Every 6 months there is a rotation. And next year, UNIL will have its first presidency, and which means at the time we will have to submit the grant proposal for the third phase. At that time, which is absolutely critical for the next phase, we will preside this alliance as a non-European country, by the way, which is quite friendly. So a lot of responsibilities. So what are the CIVIS ambitions? That's very simple, but very ambitious indeed. It's transnational cooperation with structural impact. As Alina said, that's one of the aim or conditions from European Commission in all domains, teaching, research, societal engagement, and potentially all faculties and disciplines. But as it's a bottom-up initiative, it really depends on the willingness of our faculties or institutes to go ahead. But the structural impact is absolutely essential. So not just a one-shot experience. And also, CIVIS would like that all members of a university community, students, PhD candidates, professors, staff, could have, if they want, an opportunity to have a European activity, ideally. So very simple, but very ambitious indeed. What about UNIL? That's very simple. UNIL just want to keep running in the European dynamic. We don't want to be left apart. And if we do that, I think within 10, 15 years, we might be less attractive for students, especially if other Swiss universities keep doing work or keep working in alliances. And also, of course, it's a way to enlarge or to enrich our offering in education and research, just looking for expertise outside, and instead of opening new professorships for which we might not have the money, it might be good to collaborate with partners to get this expertise at some low cost, I would say. So where is CIVIS now beyond these ambitions? So in terms of education, and CIVIS is education oriented, the money is coming from Erasmus+. They developed this nice way of teaching, they call blended intensive program, or BIPS. I'm sure many of you, if not all, know this acronym BIPS at UNIL. This is an online shared course which is taught by several teachers from at least 3 different universities, and with a common public from students, and there is at the end a 1-week mobility in the organizing university. It's quite popular. It works very well. It's a lot of work behind, the back office work is intensive as well, but it works. But this is not the main objective of CIVIS. CIVIS wants to develop joint, respectively multiple degrees at the master or bachelor or even PhD level, which are long-lasting programs, structurally implemented programs. And we just started now. What about research? As I said, there is no budget in CIVIS for research, but still, the member universities want to include research, and I think that's a great idea, into CIVIS. So we try to do whatever we can, marginally taking money from Erasmus+, and we focus right now on PhD short-term mobility, 1 week to 1 month, sharing of research infrastructures. We also launch and still want to launch further seed funding, call for seed funding for projects, including our African members. And this is more a Lausanne specificity. We try to to develop participatory research with societal stakeholders, which I think should be the DNA of CIVIS, which is hardly the case right now, but we try to push hard at Lausanne. And of course, there are some governance structures, some boards of rectors, which meet every 4 months, say, board of vice rectors, and they meet once a month. That's a steering committee, which basically takes the decisions. And there are a number of council, education, research, and I would like to stress, pinpoint the student council, which is very interesting because students can meet and bring up some concerns or propositions to the alliance to be implemented. And beyond the council and the boards, there is the management committee, which is of course essential to run all the alliance. And the management committee of CIVIS is based in Aix-Marseille University. What are the challenges we are facing now beyond the intention? And that's what Alina mentioned. This big gap between the European ambition in terms of objectives and the project-based way of doing things by slices of 4 years. What can you do within 4 years if you have no guarantee that it can keeps going afterwards? And with this problem, we identified a kind of pernicious effect. As we don't have time, we have to rush. For example, we have to rush till the end of 2026 to give some concrete results. So what are we doing? We look for colleagues who are ready to do something at the international level. Are these very good colleagues, by the way, are they the best programs to develop from a strategic point of view for a faculty, an institute, or a university? Maybe by chance, but probably not. So these guys are very enthusiastic, we rely on them, but we are just grasping low-hanging fruits. And that's not the best way to organize an overall strategy in the long term, because we are committed to work on the short-term budgets. And this is a big concern. And of course, we have a strong dependence on all political levels. And I will just pinpoint one at the university level, the closest to us. As you know, rectorates are changing every 4 or 5 years, like in Lausanne. And we've seen this kind of rotation in rectorates. And in some cases, I don't want to give names because I'm recorded, but in one case, the original rectorate was very supportive in one country. They were the builder of the new alliance in 2019. But then it changed completely, and the new rector and vice rectors don't have any interest in this alliance, so they don't show up in boards, whether the steering committee or the board of rectors. They just delegate to very nice people, by the way, but they have no decision power. And it weakens the alliance. And it could be our turn someday. You never know what a new rectorate will decide what would be its position, because these are not the original actors of the initiative. That's quite tricky. Even more tricky in a way is how things are going within the institution. As I mentioned before, we rushed within a few months to get into such an opportunity. But in fact, opening to European activities is a major cultural change to us. And for that, you need time to convince people internally, not that much colleague professors or researchers, but much more staff within the general central services, within the faculty services, within the institute services, at all levels. These people have not been really prepared to this additional work, which is complex, on top of being additional. It's not routine work at all, not at all. And they don't want to do it because we don't give them additional human resources, because the budget is limited to the central unit, the cellule, which has a lot of work to do, by the way. So we were facing a kind of internal say, passivity or resistance, which is absolutely normal, I would say. So if we look back to the Bologna process, I was part of it, I remember, we had many meetings with the rectorate, with the central services. Be ready to modify your study tracks, be ready to implement the credits, ECTS, be ready to modify, and that is the worst thing to do, to modify the academic agenda. You will not anymore start the academic year late October, but mid-September. That was really a big crisis. It took years to convince people that there was no other way to do. In that case, it's not that important because it's bottom-up, it's optional, but still, people have to be convinced, and that's the major, difficulty we are facing now as a cell CIVIS at UNIL. Other challenges, we know that a transnational collaboration is complex. Every country has its bureaucracy. You don't even imagine how it works, for example, in Sweden. It's a different world. I just tell you, you cannot fail in Sweden as a student. If you're not good, you don't pass. But you can't fail. You can't be kicked out of the university. We have to find a solution for these students if they don't live on their own. Only that. So they ask us, what do you do for students who would fail your program at UNIL? Oh, kick them out. No, it's not possible for us. So that's only one little example, but it's every day you have a new challenge in terms of bureaucratic structure. But at IDHEAP, you know that better than everybody else. It's life. Same for legal aspect, like accreditation of courses. In Switzerland, that's very easy. If the rectorate says, looks nice, let's do it, it's accredited in a way. Then you have the central accreditation which comes, and then a few days later to check. But it's very easy. In other countries, like in France, for example, no way. You have to ask the Central Ministry for Education in Paris, and it takes time, and if it's not okay, you give it you back, you modify, and back and forth, and back and forth. It takes months, if not years, to have a simple accreditation. That's one example, but there are many others, many. You can trust me. And of course, there are limited financial resources, as was mentioned by Alina already, and I don't want to elaborate more on that. We all know we don't have any structural budget yet. If you do not manage to convince the Canton de Vaud, for example, to add a line on the structural budget, like European activities, what are we going to do? We cannot rely on soft money forever. So it's difficult. I mean, potentially difficult. So what are the perspectives now after this landscape? At the national or international level, you all know that EU has major concerns, and with the Ukraine crisis, among others, and we're not quite sure of the amount of the budget for the next phase, if any. And we also have some concern about Switzerland. You know that the governor has said that there will be budget cuts for sure. And Movesia already told us that probably that will affect also Movesia, and as a consequence, the budget they might put in European alliances. So that's our money in a way. So we don't really know what will be going on, of course. And if you read the newspapers, you know that nothing is won forever. Last week, apparently, Europe had made a strong point about the position of Switzerland that it's not yet won, both for Horizon Europe and Erasmus+, which so far has not been a priority for our politicians in Bern. Horizon Europe, yes, because it implies enterprises, so there is money for the business, for the economy, but Erasmus+, why putting money there? So it's open. What about UNIL? There are good news. really, I think, at UNIL. And the best news I could mention today is that the rectorate has accepted last December, less than a year ago, to support joint, respectively multiple international degrees. That's a revolution. We tried for a long time to open our courses to collaboration, and that wasn't possible. But now, this is one of a clear illustration, simple illustration of what could be the benefit of belonging to an alliance, because you are pushed to modify your policies in a way that it's more open and more flexible. So that if there is only one result of being part of an alliance for some years, it's that one, I think. More concretely, and I come back to what you mentioned earlier, Alina, we are building up a transdisciplinary master on climate, energy, environment with all 11 universities, so that's really attractive, this sustainability climate change topic. And in our university, that will be the Faculty of Geosciences, which will take over as a block semester, which is already existing. As you mentioned, we'll recycle what is existing in a master, but the first semester will be fully transdisciplinary in Stockholm, and all students will be taught different topics on different disciplines. So that's interesting. And we also try to set up a new master on public health, which doesn't exist in that region here, and that would be essentially supported by the Faculty of Biology and Medicine, together with UNIL and colleagues from other faculties, of course. And again, at UNIL level, we try to do something for research, so we try to promote PhD short-term mobility. It's not very expensive, it could be very efficient. Sharing research of research infrastructures. We have many in FPM, in also geosciences. And as I said, it is a specificity of UNIL, I would say, try to promote at the international level the participative research with, with stakeholders from the society. Obviously, UNIL is ahead of many other members of our alliance, and especially because since the rectorate created this interface fund last year, and we will build up on that in collaboration with Interface. And we hope to convince some of our colleagues from the alliance to really put energy into participative research. I think that's part of the DNA of our alliance. And apart from that, students involved in CIVIS activities are very satisfied overall. And BIPs, as I said, are quite attractive, popular. There is also a good interest, high interest from the academic community, especially new professors who try to set up their network and extend it abroad. And the same is true for early career researchers, postdocs, for example, who are quite interested by what we offer in terms of research. So, in fact, whatever happens, I drew a picture which is not all bright. There are lots of challenges, but I'm deeply convinced that whatever happens to UNIL within CIVIS, if it stays in CIVIS or not, whatever happens to CIVIS as an alliance, whether it will be further financed or not, I'm absolutely convinced that this ongoing process is irreversible. It could slow down a lot, depending on EU policies, funding, but this process to me is irreversible. It depends also on the scale of what we consider, but I'm quite sure we will not go back. It's just a matter of time. All right, thank you.
Thanks a lot, Francois. This was also very interesting. It's encouraging to see that in spite of our isolation, not being member of the European Union, and the problems we have with the European Union is fully participating in this important initiative. And up to now, things are going well. There are some uncertainties, but if I understand well, up to now, things are going pretty well. So this is very encouraging. And we still have a bit of time for the general discussion, which I would like to open now. Maybe, Alina, you can come here so that you are in the picture. And the floor is open for questions either on UNIL, the European level, or both. Yes, please go ahead.
I'm jumping in for the first question. My question relies upon the concept of actorness that you mentioned, Alina. Could you maybe define it deeper? And then to Professor Bussy, do you feel this position in your alliance, so as a particularly involved in the alliance or at the European level? So so the position of being an actor.
So if like UNIL is a leader in the alliance, is it the question? It's like UNIL is a leader in the alliance, or?
So to me, it's but maybe I'm mistaken. The concept has also to do with the political position of the higher education institutions within the political actors. And then I'm wondering if Professor Bussy does feel this attitude and this way of acting in his daily life in CIVIS. Thanks.
So you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the question. I think it's a very complex thing to disentangle, right? What actorness means, but I guess what I was referring to is really this twofold way of presenting the alliance as an actor on its own. So seeing, like, making use of the tools the European Commission is offering, then so first of all the funding, but then also establishing joint identity. And I mean, all the alliances have their acronyms, they have their corporate identities, so really how alliances present themselves as actors, but then also if they're actually perceived as actors on their own. And I think the European Commission is really strong at this, because they also wanted to establish new actors, but then of course actorness is also dependent on resources and very often connects to the legal status, and that's why now the legal status is discussed. And you mentioned that CIVIS is a legal entity under Belgian law, which a lot of university associations have been also before. So also the European University Association, which is the largest university association, which is more like an interest group, and they are also under Belgian law. So I guess also this institutionalization and not just having exchange among university members, but really having also an office, like a management structure next to the governing boards or governance structure would also be important for this. Yeah, so all these elements, I guess, would factor in.
So as a non-EU member, we feel a bit, a bit off in the way we don't have the feeling that we can really act on EU policy. We kind of have to cope with them. But on the other hand, we try to be good players, as good as possible. And in the daily life, we realize that Lausanne brings a lot of energy of proposition in the alliance. For example, all the research aspects. I mean, nothing was happening for a year now. We organized a meeting in Lausanne with our colleagues, and for 2 days, and then we submitted this, feuille de route, a proposition, and it was accepted. And more than that, people say, well, that's a great job, and we try that on all fronts, including the one I mentioned on participative research. But we try to be as good players as possible, but we feel a bit insecure because we cannot directly act in Brussels, or hardly. And that's a kind of uncomfortable, I would say. So we try to prove by the action that it's a nice idea, nice initiative, but we cannot really contribute to the EU policy, I think, not directly.
Other questions? Also in French, of course. On peut aussi poser des questions en français, dans d'autres langues éventuellement. Français, anglais. And you're also allowed to question each other.
I'm not sure we will talk together.
Nils.
Quite a bit.
I'm questioned by your point that there is now 64 alliances, that there might be in the future less than that, so it would mean, in my perspective, that there is a form of Darwinism in this initiative, which CIVIS might be a victim of.
Second line, yeah.
How to avoid this, or how to be successful if there is Darwinism in the game? And I mean, this is a comment I've already made, and Francois, you know what I'm going to say. So if you look at the partnership CIVIS has with the external world, let Europe aside, there is African universities. But for our new scholars who are trying to establish, extend their network, is Africa really the destination? Should we look eastwards and westwards towards Asia and towards the States in order to be sure that the new researchers that are part of our future are really interested in being in the initiative and contribute to the success of CIVIS, and to avoid that we don't survive.
Okay,
So, but I mean, it's a question for you, Francois, but also for you, Alina, because this kind of Darwinism that you may have come with in your study is also probably problematic for other universities.
So would you like to react first?
Yeah, sure. I mean, in the end, it is always startup funding, what the European Union is offering, right? Also in other fields. So you would have a project funded, and then ideally the member states should come in, or the institutions themselves that make use of the funds. So it would require lobbying by those who make use of this initiative and to like it, and think it should stay, to lobby at the institutional level, so vis-a-vis directorate, what you outlined, but then also in the respective member states. And I think the European Commission is now trying to involve also the member states more strongly with this structural funding line. But then, of course, we will have this pattern again where those countries that already have a more strongly resourced higher education sector would also be able to sustain the funding of their member universities in these alliances, and this would then again further stratify. So I also see issues with that over longer term perspective, we would potentially see drop out those institutions first that could not successfully lobby for funding at their member state level, also because these countries are economically not as strongly performing maybe as others, and we always had this issue with cohesion in the European Union, especially at 27 member states. So maybe here other funds can come in. So we also have EU regional policy that could maybe come in. So maybe these universities get more creative and seek for other funds from other resources that are not strictly higher education. So that's an option. But yeah, that's definitely the danger that only those which already have the resources can actually keep up and institutionalize somehow what they have established with the EU funding and make it sustainable after the funding runs out. Yeah.
That's the point, I think. to me, CIVIS is an experimentation,
Yeah.
which might stop at some point because there might not be money anymore. But if we manage to structuralize before some activities, we will keep doing that. And I would say that CIVIS or not CIVIS, we could have joint programs with other universities in Europe or worldwide. And because that would trigger this idea of opening and getting the best experts we want for a specific purpose, you know, and that's beyond CIVIS. That CIVIS would just have been a kind of warm-up in a way. And I see that this way. If CIVIS is dying, well, that's because it was not good enough. And then I would immediately say, I already told the rector, if it stops, let's find another alliance we choose, really, not in a rush like the first time, but specifically depending on our strategies. You know, maybe it could be somewhere with partners which are open to Eastern countries or United States, say. With some time, more time to decide and more experience, I think we could do something really
Is
great.
it usual for universities to move from an alliance to another one?
I don't think so far, but maybe I might be wrong because we are still at a time where money is available in a way. I think so.
Well, there have been alliances that were established and they have been dissolved, and also there has been movement across alliances.
Yeah. Okay.
It is happening, but it's rather rare.
Yeah.
You also had the question about associated partners, right? I think this is more interesting for the associated partners than for those who are members of the alliance, right? And this connects to my positioning point I had, that you would probably join as an African higher education institution to signal something in your regional space of higher education, and then getting this label, so to say, of being associated partner in a European University Alliance might strengthen you, or in the competition you have in your regional space. So I'm not sure if it's really for, like, you would always have to ask, so whom does this actually benefit? And for the associated partners, I clearly see there's more benefits. But then
Yes, a large part, but not totally. I'm a geologist, you know, so I think what we can benefit from our partners in Africa is the access to terrain, to the field, any kind of field, social field, geological field, whatever, mining, quite interesting, but they are interested in our infrastructures for education and research, definitely, although some of them have top-notch equipment. But I think it could be a win-win situation in some cases. But overall, that's probably not the partner I would have chosen for top-notch research, you know, excellency, and that's where we move from excellence to inclusion, you know. And that's a trade-off.
This is a question I wanted to ask. Alina, you mentioned this tension between excellence and inclusiveness, and I was wondering if this is something that exists within CIVIS when you have discussions, and there are those pushing in one direction, those pushing in the other one within the alliance. Yes.
But at the fundamental level, which is resources, I mean, if I show you back the map, obviously, resources are not the same everywhere in Europe, you know, and it already makes a difference. You might be inclusive in some projects, but in other projects you say, oh, let's go for those who have money, and let's go on.
It's not even excellence in an academic sense; it's resources more.
Resources means more means to do research for infrastructure. That's also why we want to share infrastructures for the benefit of all. Sure. That's kind of inclusiveness, I would say. But then you can benefit from very brilliant scientists who have not access to some infrastructure and then collaborate. Who knows? But in many respects, but maybe my colleague, there are quite a few of them here from the CIVIS, have a different opinion. But I see a kind of discrepancy among the members.
Yes.
Yeah. I find quite interesting the new initiative. It's for EU for all. Because if you look before this, you talked about Darwinism. I will talk about MasterChef. Because it's like 64 alliances who often work on the same type of project. Like 64 who want to develop micro-credentials. And it's like which one is going to do best and have the best recipe. But no, there is this network of the alliances. What for you? What could be the impact? Could it lead to some convergence, and so that you can imagine that some credentials might be transferable from an alliance to another? Or how do you see what it could bring?
I think you captured nicely that, especially at the example of micro-credentials, that the idea is really to scale up what is done at the individual alliances, because they're all working on comparable topics, and also they're not reinventing the wheel, so to say, because all of them have similar ideas also about shorter term educational cooperation, and micro-credentials is one issue. So before the For You For All project, which is also receiving funding, and they recently were looking for someone implementing the project, and they're now establishing a team. It was more informal, and they saw that it didn't really work out too well because, again, issue of resources. You would mostly work for your alliance, and then you cannot on top attend all the meetings where everyone from all the 64 alliances would meet. So I think this idea was really to give, to equip this network with resources so that this collection of practices works more smoothly and not only on a voluntary basis, so that it's streamlined. Yeah, and I think the idea would be to, in the end, transform how certain aspects of European education are organized, and micro-credentials is probably the easiest way forward, and the European Commission has been pushing this also in other fields of education, not just higher education. So it's also done at the level of skill formation, so vocational education and training. And for the European degree, it has, like, this is also what the For You For All wants to do, but here you can already see a strong watering down of the original. Yeah.
Is CIVIS part of For EU For All?
I actually don't know, but we...
Yes, we are associated. We are not full member, but we are associated because we have Brussels that is participating to the initiative.
So we are not one of the 41, but...
Yeah, I think we have an external status because all of them participate, but we don't receive funding, I think.
Exactly.
But I need to check.
Yeah.
But we are part of the process, and there will be certainly some exchanges with them.
Other questions? Yes, Melissa?
I have a question. It's kind of like putting some question together as I am going to talk, so I apologize. There was an aspect about sort of one of the concerns about brain drain happening within Europe. And I was kind of curious about like how the EU level sees its maybe moral obligation to stem brain drain in places like Africa, where they have, you know, actual skill and resources there to also keep their population within, and if there is any, like, I guess, research that the EU level is like kind of doing on, like, how do they view their role within this higher education and the brain drain that can occur, and then trying to stem it. That I don't know if that would touch on any of the things that either of you do, but
I think one part of the brain drain story is certainly the beginning also of the initiative, where this was also one of the things that was discussed, that this initiative can prevent brain drain from Europe because there's a strong international competition among universities, and you would see people wanting to study in the United States, for example, or also maybe Asia was mentioned. So there's also the more like within the global landscape of higher education, to position the European area, so to say, and to keep the brains in Europe. This was one idea also for the initiative, for the associated partners. I cannot tell, but it would be really interesting to look into this. And it's actually more recent that this associated partner pattern is also emerging. So I don't know how it is for CIVIS. For how long have you had your associated partners outside of Europe?
They are associate members for now.
Right, so it's
we
very
formalize
recent,
that, and
so,
then we're considered as partners. You know, concretely, not much is happening. I must say, this is more willingness than action.
But in general, the issue of skills shortage is heavily debated at European level, and there have been, again, also in the broader field of education and skills, a lot of initiatives. There was the European Year of Skills last year, and also Ursula von der Leyen is talking a lot about it. And then also Mario Draghi published his competitiveness report, and skills assume along like big parts of the report are on skills and skill shortages. So it is a recurrent topic, and then this might actually play into, but I haven't looked into the associated partner aspect of the alliances that much.
Are other Swiss universities part of alliances?
Oh yeah.
Not all. Not all of them. Okay.
I think it's 9.
Neuchâtel is not.
Okay.
Yeah. It's half of them. I think.
And do you discuss among Swiss alliance people? Do you sort of coordinate?
Simone would be more the guy to answer, but for sure, CIVIS is a good example for the BIPs. Yeah. And you have been invited in Bern to kind of comment on the BIP organization as an example.
Movesia is trying to help the coordination because there are other colleagues from other universities that are involved in this initiative. But yes, so far there are exchanges, especially we started, for instance, in our case, we were among the 4 first Swiss institutions in the initiative with Zurich, Basel, and Geneva. So we start an informal group, and then now it's more Movesia that is inviting us to workshop and exchange best practices. But still, I have to admit that compared to other European countries, the exchange of best practices is not so much because each of us, especially university, are financed by the canton, and so we actually don't care so much even if we are facing. This is my personal perception, I don't want to. But at the end, it's working each of us and separately, and then we have just once in a while an exchange coordinated by Movesia where we complain about the lack of funding.
So you don't get the impression that it's very important for Switzerland, for Swiss higher education policy, that Swiss universities are active in these alliances?
I think that Swiss institutions are now getting are now understanding the stakes, what you presented, what we are trying to do all together. The CIRI and the Swiss authorities, considering the current foreseen budget cuts, I'm not sure are totally convinced. I think they encourage us, but let's be honest, we are facing a major challenge in 26 already, and we absolutely have no idea how much funding CIRI will give us. So we have building a European university, but on the Swiss side, they just hope that we will be reassociated to Erasmus. But it's another topic.
Time passes quickly, especially when we talk about interesting things. So my suggestion is that we move to the aperitif, which should be waiting for us just over there. And of course, we can continue the conversation. I hope you have some time to remain here. So a big thank you to both of you for this fascinating discussion.